My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I have an interesting subject. I want to talk about universal basic income. Now, I know it's a little bit different than the usual shows I've been doing on this channel, but I think it's important because I think universal basic income is where economics and psychology start to share the same space. So I think it's a valid thing to talk about. And I don't think enough people know what it is, and because they don't know what it is, they're not talking about it. So let's take it right from the beginning. What is universal basic income? It's a government guaranteed unconditional payment to an individual. Basically, it's a guaranteed minimum income or wage, we can call it. And it comes with no strings attached. Now, when I first heard this, I had my doubts, and I still do, but later on in the show, I do want to go over a study that's been done on this in Stockton, California, and it's been done over a period of a year. So they do have some good evidence now to look at. Because in the beginning of just giving somebody money with no strings attached is difficult. It's a very difficult thought in our capitalistic United States society. But let's look into it a little bit deeper. So why would somebody offer universal basic income? And the point here is that because it provides enough money to cover the basics of a cost of living. So you can take a person who lives below the poverty line and they don't have to start making choices between are they going to eat this week or are they going to get their insulin or things like this. So, and it goes on. So we'll get into that a little bit deeper as well. Also, universal basic income, what it seeks to do is to offset job losses caused by technology. Now, what we're talking about here is, say, automation, because typically what's happening now is that we're becoming more and more automated to where, let's say you have a call center. Now, 10 years ago, I was doing my internship and I was working next to a call center, and there would be like 50 people there. These days, the way things work, you don't need to do that. You could have one person at the top and maybe two people working in an office, and you could still get just as much work done, and the owner could make just as much or more money, but they don't have to hire all those people. And this same thing in terms of McDonald's. A corporate, let's say, wet dream would be one person at the top basically making all the money and having no workers, but having a bunch of robots. So what we have to look forward to is that when we go to McDonald's, it's going to say if you want a hamburger, milkshake, fries, you just press a button and all these things come out. And you're only going to need like one or two people in all of McDonald's to be able to handle this. We can also look at this in terms of superstores right now, although they're getting challenged because of Amazon, but it still works. So let's take Walmart, for example. What Walmart does is that they underpay people. And so let's say they pay a minimum wage and you work there full time. You still don't have enough money to be able to make it. You can't make ends meet. So what happens? Well, you end up going and looking for welfare. Now again, in the United States, we have a very negative thought about people who use welfare. But let's be honest about it. 50% of people on welfare have full-time jobs. Let me say that again. 50% of people on welfare have full-time jobs. So somehow we've had this mindset that we want to put down people who are on welfare. But where is the welfare exactly? Because we never talk about corporate welfare. Now, what's corporate welfare? Well, let's say somebody's at Walmart, they have a full-time job, and they can't make ends meet. So now they need other programs to help them out. Where does that money come from? What makes the ends meet is everybody else's, middle class especially, their taxes go into welfare to be able to help these people that have full-time jobs already. So essentially, what does it do? Why is it corporate welfare? It's because places like Walmart, they are not encouraged in any way to pay a living wage because they know people can go and get the rest of it from welfare. So if we really wanted to end welfare, what we would do is we would raise the minimum wage and we would force companies to pay people a living wage. And they wouldn't have to go to get welfare. So again, so what is welfare in this sense? Well, it's corporate welfare. So since the 1980s or so, we've had a, what do you want to call it? A program, let's say, where they want to do trickle-down economics, where the people at the top, the rich or the corporations, don't pay that much in taxes. Their taxes have gone down. And so supposedly what that does is it frees up more money for rich people. And when that happens is we have to hope, we have to pray, we have to cross our fingers that rich people feel good enough one day to give some money to the little people. And we know that that doesn't work, because if you give $1 to a rich person, how much of it gets back into the economy? Well, a lot of studies say about 8 cents on the dollar. That's not much. But if you give $1 to a poor person who's below the poverty level, how much of that gets back into the economy? Right, about a full dollar, because they need it. So the difference here is that trickle-down economics puts the money in the rich people's hands, and then we hope that it gets to the poor people. Whereas UBI, or Universal Basic Income, it's more of a trickle-up economics, where if you're below the poverty line, you'll get money there, so you don't have to do all these other, and we'll talk about it more, but it also improves the psychological well-being, and it improves families, and obviously it gives people more choices. So again, trickle-down versus trickle-up economics. Now, who would get this money? Here's where part of the fight is, because some people believe, and if I believe in UBI, I don't know all of the stats on this yet, but because it's kind of new, there's not enough studies out there, to be honest. But a lot of people believe that only people below the poverty line should be getting universal basic income. And that's one thought. Another thought is that only those who have been replaced by automation should get it. Now, interestingly enough, about 48% of American citizens believe this. And I don't think that's a bad idea either. The other people think that everybody should be able to get a certain amount of money back from the government. That gets a little bit tricky, because how much money do we have, right? So how are we going to pay for this? Again, different thoughts out there. In the study that I'm going to show you, they actually do it through donations. So some people think we should just tax the wealthy. That makes sense. Who are you going to tax? The poor? You can't do that. Or the middle class, they're already getting hit. Or just tax the big corporations, because the way things work is a lot of these corporations don't even really pay taxes. There's secretaries and people that have regular jobs, teachers that pay more in taxes than some of these big corporations. So it makes sense to do that. The other way is, again, donations. So those are 3 ways that we can look to pay for it. Now, we might think, who would support a universal basic income? We might think it's poor people. Now, they might if they knew about it, but they're not the ones that are pushing for universal basic income, although some are. There are some people in the middle class who are proponents of UBI. But here's the interesting part. The biggest proponents of universal basic income are billionaires, right? Because they understand that through automation, there's going to be thousands, if not millions of people that don't have jobs. And it's easy to say that we can retrain them, but the studies on that show that that doesn't work very well. I mean, if you get a person in their 40s and 50s that have been working 20 years, let's say, in the service industry or in some type of transportation or trucking industry, what are the chances of training them to do computer programming when they're 50? You know, if they liked college at some point, they probably would have went to college, right? So it's a whole different aspect of their life. So the studies that they've done, how has it worked to retrain people? Well, about 0 to 15% of those people actually do get enough education and get enough skill to be able to move into a higher paying job like that. So it doesn't work very well. So again, these people that are billionaires, and let's go over some of the names. We've got Mark Zuckerberg, we've got Chris Hughes, that are the co-founders of Facebook. We've got Elon Musk, we've got Sir Richard Branson, and I can't think of the guy's name, Bezos. All of these people actually support this, in terms, because they understand that there's not going to be, There's going to be the very rich, and there's going to be the very poor. And what are you going to do with that poor group? So again, universal basic income. Here's a quote from Mark Zuckerberg: "The greatest successes have come from having the freedom to fail." And again, if you don't have any money, you have no sources. The thought to go to school, how are you going to do that when you can't even afford the basics of life? So again, it knocks out the opportunities that you can have. And these billionaires are understanding that if you want to have a good society, you're going to have to start building it from the bottom up and not from the top, from these people that already have it. So here's where I believe this coincides with psychology. So I want to use some information from Dr. Albee, who was a former president of the American Psychology Association. This is what he said, and this is what he argued for through his whole professional life. He said that the root causes of personality disorders, mood disorders, child abuse, and violence all stem from poverty, social deprivation, and insecurity in terms of basic needs, such as food, clothing, shelter, and healthy attachment. And again, if you come from a very poor background, you have parents or one parent that can't afford the basics to even keep the electricity on, how are you going to have a healthy attachment with your children? Can somebody actually stay home and take care of the kids? And how do you even get a job? Because then you have to pay for childcare. And if you're making minimum wage, you can't pay somebody else to stay at home with your kid. It's not going to work. So these are the things that this universal basic income seeks to remedy. And looking at this further, if you have an anti-poverty program, what you're going to have is that people are going to use less antidepressants. They're going to use less anti-anxiety medication. It only makes sense. So let's take a look at this article that I have that deals with one of the studies. And I'm going to read it straight through just so I don't start putting my own opinions on this too much. So we're just going to read straight through. This is from NPR. The title is California Program Giving $500. So that's the amount that we're kind of talking here about what we should do. $500, no strings attached, stipends. And it says that it pays off, the study finds. So let's see what they mean by this. A high-profile universal basic income experiment in Stockton, California, which gave randomly selected residents $500 per month for 2 years with no strings attached, measurably improved participants' job prospects, financial stability, and overall well-being, according to a newly released study of the program's first year. Interestingly here, so we're naming the number as $500 per month. Again, no strings attached, and it says randomly selected residents. The Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration, or SEED, was founded in February of 2019 by then Mayor Michael Tubbs and funded by donors. And there's the other answer. How are we going to fund this? In this sense, in this study, it was funded by donors, including the Economic Security Project. It gave 125 people living in neighborhoods at or below Stockton's median household income the unconditional monthly stipend. Okay, so again, now we have who are we going to give this to, and it's people below the median household income. So again, we're not going to pay everybody. We're just going to give it to people who are below the median income and who probably need this money a lot. A study of the period from February 2019 to February 2020, conducted by a team of independent researchers, determined that full-time employment rose among those who received the guaranteed income and that their financial, physical, and emotional health improved. Going back to Dr. Albee, who's unfortunately, he has passed away, but what he has said has come to fruition. He is correct, at least in this particular study. The last year has shown us that far too many people were living on the financial edge and were pushed over by COVID-19. Tubbs said in a statement, "Seed gave people the dignity to make their own choices, the ability to live up to their potential, and improved economic stability going into the turmoil of the pandemic." The idea of universal basic income was featured prominently in the 2020 campaign of Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang and has gained further traction during the coronavirus epidemic. Well, we all know that, Andrew Yang lost the election, so that didn't go very well for him. But at least they're still talking about universal basic income. Supporters say that for people living in poverty, a guaranteed income can alleviate stress. No kidding, right? And provide the financial security needed to find good jobs and to avoid debt. Seems really obvious. Critics worry it could eliminate the incentive to work, okay, as well as endanger certain existing safety net programs. Tubbs countered this criticism in a 2018 interview with NPR's All Things Considered, saying research and trials from the previous 3 decades did not indicate that $500 a month would discourage people from working. He argued that more financial stability would make people work better and smarter and harder, as well as make it possible to spend time with their families and participate in their communities. In a subsequent interview this January, he told NPR that the money had decidedly not quashed people's work ethic. The guaranteed income results from Stockton, California are in, and what we're looking at is employment is up, productivity is up, well-being is up, stress is down. It allowed people to pay off debt, and the money was spent on necessities and not drugs. I think it's really interesting that they have to point that out because people like to fight against each other, right? Which I think is some type of trauma. Rich people tend to want to make fun of people at the bottom, and they'll say, "Oh, what are they going to spend that money on? Alcohol and drugs or cigarettes or whatever?" And they needed to say that didn't happen. I think that was specifically for them because that just seems the obvious thing that people would say. It did not change us into a different country, but it actually allowed folks to have a floor to persist during times, especially like these ones, he said. Among the key findings outlined in a 25-page white paper are that the unconditional cash reduced the month-to-month income fluctuations that households face, increased recipients' full-time employment by 12 percentage points, and decreased their measurable feelings of anxiety and depression compared with their control group counterparts. So here we go. If you have a little bit more money and you have a little bit more opportunity, you have a little bit more self-esteem, and more people were able to push their limits and to try to reach their potential and found full-time work. Here's something that I know about a lot of people who work part-time or they work full-time in jobs that they don't like or they hate or do not fully pay the bills. They can't take a day off to go for an interview. But with this extra $500 stipend, they could take a day off from work and look for a better job. The study also found that by alleviating financial hardship, the guaranteed income created new opportunities for self-determination. I just said that, didn't I? It created new opportunities of choice, goal setting, and risk-taking. And I've already said that. What a shock. It furthered recipients' ability to cover unexpected expenses, which researchers noted was particularly important given the onset of the pandemic. Individuals spent most of the money on basic needs, including food, merchandise, utilities, and automobile costs, with less than 1% going toward alcohol and or tobacco. A study like this is hard to fight, right? Because people are still going to say you give somebody $500 and they're going to spend it frivolously. Again, according to this study, that's not true at all. Most people just want an opportunity in life. That's what they want. They want a chance to do better. Nobody wants to sit around all day doing nothing and feel like they have no meaning and purpose in their life. Before Seed came along, I was paying a lot of bills and I didn't know how I was going to eat, a participant said. It's like being able to breathe. The study also noted that positive effects of the $500 sum rippled outward in ways that alleviated financial strain across fragile networks and generated more time for relationships. Of course, less divorces and more happy children. For instance, stabilizing food security for members of one household also alleviated any strain on those they ordinarily relied upon for food. The stipends helped recipients stretch resources to cover needs like caring for aging or ill family members, school or sports supplies, and transportation to and from doctor's appointments that they might otherwise have skipped. Strategies, the researchers noted, that were more commonly utilized by women, who typically bear the brunt of most unpaid care work. Under less financial strain, they wrote, many women were able to attend to their own needs in ways that they had not in years. So I work with a lot of people that do have difficulty going to doctor's appointments. And sometimes if they're in rural areas, they might live 80, 90 miles away from a doctor or a hospital. They can't make it. So what happens is we end up paying so much more as a society for emergency room visits than people actually keeping up with their health care. Anecdotal evidence here. Mona bought diapers for her grandchildren and an adequate amount of feminine hygiene products for the first time in months. Like many, she ordinarily bypassed meeting her basic hygiene for her grandkids, the paper reads. And someone else purchased new shoes for herself while paying someone to mow her grass rather than having to do it under a blazing Central Valley sun with health limitations. While the study's findings were cheered by those involved, as well as many mayors, on Wednesday, some experts said more research is needed. Of course. The study is limited because it lasted only 2 years, adding that people are unlikely to drop out of the labor force if they know extra money is temporary. A married father of 3 who works in construction was able to repair his broken vehicle without needing to save up, making it possible for him to get to his job out of town, which of course he probably would have lost his job if he couldn't make it there. Now, I'm an expert at this when I was young. Every time my car broke down, I couldn't get to school. You miss 2 classes, and guess what? You get dropped from the class. So everybody looks at you like you're a loser, that you have no drive in life and no thought to do better. But if you can't make it to places, this is the way society treats you. So here's a person that was able to have that remedied. Here's somebody else, a mother of 6 and a grandmother of 6, has put much of the money toward her teenage son's football camp, new shoes, money for food, as well as rent and bills. One recipient mourning the death of his daughter said the money gave him time to take opportunities for himself and be around more for his family, noting that a lot of people have noticed a positive change. Research spanning the full 2 years of the project will be available in 2022. In the meantime, similar initiatives are cropping up in cities all across the United States. So I'm going to end it there because, as you can see, it's just one positive thing after another, and I could name a bunch of anecdotal evidence here, but overall, the empirical evidence does highly suggest that if you do help people with a $500 stipend per month, they're going to use it in the right ways to benefit their life. So again, as usual, I'm not telling you how to think. It's just one study, and I want to compare that with the economics along with psychology. I think we can all admit, and I've done this with a lot of clients that say, oh, I'm so depressed. Oh, I have so much anxiety. I'm like, well, how much of that could be alleviated if you actually had enough money to eat? What if you had a roof over your head that you knew you weren't going to get kicked out next week? Would that alleviate some of your stress? Of course it would. So I like to think that with all the years of studying and going through college and all that, to be a licensed marriage and family therapist, that we're all these great, intelligent people that We know Freud back and forth and Carl Jung and all these people. But the fact is, a lot of it's just based off of the fact that if people don't have food, clothing, and shelter and healthy attachments in their life's going to suck. That's just the bottom line. So I hope you enjoyed today's show and found it valuable. It's a little off the subject of what I usually do. If you found the show valuable, please like it and send it to a friend, and please subscribe. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next week.